I'm making my own way, but I stumble and I falter every day. But I love my baby now. Well, I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Stay with me.
Hello, and welcome to our continuing series, Pathways to Parenting Success. My name is Dr. Jan Hittleman. I'll be your host this evening, and I'm really excited to be here. We have a wonderful panel for you tonight, and we're going to be talking about body image, our body image obsession. That's our topic for tonight. And we have such a wonderful group, not only of adults, but also of young adults as well. Before we get started, I just want to thank our partners, the Boulder Valley School District, Channel 22, without whose help we could not provide this ongoing free presentation to the community. And our partners, our sponsors who also make this possible, the Hope Coalition, the Boulder County Healthy Youth Alliance, the Boulder Valley School District, the Parent Engagement Network, the Boulder Counseling Cooperative, the Boulder Public Library Foundation, the Daily Camera, and Centennial Peaks Hospital. We appreciate your support. We have a very important topic tonight, and I want to just start by giving you a little fact. And this is something that we found from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey in 2009. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey is a national survey, and it's also given locally every 2 years, and it asks a variety of questions about risk behaviors. And one of the questions that they ask is whether or not the students, these are random high school students from our community, whether they thought that they were overweight. Now, they also ask for demographic information that allows them to calculate whether or not students really were overweight or not. And according to the survey, and this is the total amount now, boys and girls, and this is high school students for the Boulder Valley School District, 9% were actually overweight based on their body mass index. However, 19% indicated that they thought they were overweight. And that gives you a sense of the challenge that we have in our community and in our culture, where we have extreme concern and some distortions about body image. When we look closer at the data, we find that this is even more of an issue for girls than boys, where girls, about 7% were actually overweight. 24% indicated that they thought they were overweight. Of the boys, 11% were overweight and 14.5% thought that they were overweight. To talk about this, we have a wonderful panel, and I want to start with Carmen Kuhl. Carmen Kuhl created the BYBA, the Boulder Youth Body Alliance, and we're going to learn a lot more about that this evening. And Carmen has been a psychotherapist in private practice in Boulder for 11 years. She works with the spectrum of eating and weight-related concerns both individually and in groups, and has worked in a variety of outpatient and inpatient settings. With a commitment to community activism and prevention, she writes and lectures frequently, and she's the founder and executive director of the Boulder Youth Body Alliance. This is a nonprofit, youth-driven program that empowers teens to reclaim a positive body image and to create social change around the ideas, beliefs, and messages that lead to eating disorders and body dissatisfaction. It's my pleasure to introduce Carmen Kuhl. Carmen, welcome.
Thank you.
Carmen, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what motivated you to start BYBA.
Yeah. So I started Boulder Youth Body Alliance back in 2004, and partly it was out of my own experience recovering from an eating disorder and the death of my sister, who had struggled for over 20 years with an eating disorder. And the part of me that's always been interested in prevention and also interested in social justice work, and as a therapist wanting to balance out my work privately with people with also taking action in the community and doing things around the conditions that were leading people to suffer with the things they were suffering from. And I was lucky enough to meet a group of students at New Vista High School back in 2004 that had gotten together and wanted to do a community action project around body image. And they were so motivated by the idea that they could actually do something and kind of move from this place of being passive recipients of toxic messages that tell them they're not okay to being active advocates where they could actually create change. And that was really inspiring to me. And so the following year, piloted a program that got a lot of interest, and it took off, and it's been running ever since.
And are there groups at different schools? How does it work?
No, we have one peer education group, which is the biggest program that we have in BYBA. And right now we have students from, I think, 5 or 6 different high schools, actually. We have 16 total.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of services does BYPA provide to the community?
Yeah, I'm actually going to let one of them answer that,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
We go around to the community in schools, anywhere from elementary school to middle school to high school, and we do presentations to any class that basically welcomes us in, and we just send out the message that yes, we're being sent these toxic messages, and we're being told that if you're not this, you're not okay, and all these different messages, but that there's a different way to look at life, and there's a different way to look at your surroundings and yourself and what you're told and what you believe, and just going around and trying to spread the idea of self-love rather than self-hate, and that there's this one image that you're supposed to fit. And then outside of the community, every year we go most of the time on 2 trips to Washington, D.C. to lobby for the federal response to eliminate eating disorders. It's called the FREED Act. And so we take 3 or 4 days off of school, and we go out to D.C. and lobby on Capitol Hill to congressmen and senators, and it's really amazing. I mean, just to see I've been in BYBA for 4 years now, and just to see the difference of awareness that's been just in our community in such a short time has been amazing. It's been
And in terms of the political activism of BYBA, help our audience understand what some of the goals are that you're all trying to accomplish nationally.
So the FREED Act, it's a comprehensive eating disorder bill that has a couple different components, and one of them would be a research component about eating disorders, and it would have a grant that would for scientists and just to research more about eating disorders and the causes and how to prevent them. And then there's also a part that would require insurance companies to cover eating disorders in their policies, because most insurance companies do not cover eating disorders, and it's very, very expensive to treat. And then there also a part of the research component is to figure out how many people die from eating disorders each year, because it's not required on death certificates to state if someone died from an eating disorder or not. So there are not very accurate statistics about how many people die each year from an eating disorder. And when we were in DC, actually, we met a fellow lobbyist who was struggling with an eating disorder. And the year after that, when we were supposed to lobby with her again, she had died in her sleep a couple nights before to her eating disorder. And I think that was probably one of the most impactful things of my life to go through, because I had never known someone to die from an eating disorder, and it made us want to fight so much harder for the FREED Act to get passed. And because of her and because of the work that we've been doing, we were invited to speak at the congressional briefing for the FREED Act. And I spoke last year in April in the congressional briefing, and it was amazing. And it's one of the best feelings in the world, knowing that we as teenagers can make a difference in this world, and go to DC and talk to our congressmen and have them co-sponsor a bill on the spot, because they truly believe that it's an amazing bill.
And then on top of that, to talk to our peers and be in front of our classes and kind of just being a different voice that's coming into our communities, into our schools, saying that the media is telling us that we have to be this way, but we can have a voice and say that we don't have to, listen to what the media is telling us, and that we can kind of define our own lives and what we believe and what we think.
And Taylor, have you ever struggled with negative body image yourself?
Yeah, my freshman year, I found BYBA and I joined it, but it was definitely a rough year. I remember my freshman year, all I can really remember from it is the fact that I wore the same jeans and the same sweatshirt every single day and walked through the hall and just kind of didn't have a lot of self-confidence and didn't really want anyone to notice me, and I kind of just wanted to blend in. And now, by my senior year, it's completely changed. I mean, I went from kind of this really dark place of not wanting to be noticed and isolating myself to being senior class president and being in front of my school and being in BYBA, speaking out, and just trying to use my voice and recognize the fact that the struggles that I went through are a cause of many different things, but that even just going in front of a class or going in front of the community in any way, that what I have to say might help someone else. And I think that's one thing that a lot of us share in common, is that we love to get up in front of a group of people and speak about it and inform people about this issue, because we feel that the struggles that we went through and the pain that we felt can all be worth it if we just get through to one person. And I mean, through our presentations and just even through my friends, just the little things that they say about how they never thought about seeing it in a different light, or looking at themselves as a person and looking at their bodies as a temple of reasons of what their bodies can do for them rather than just what they look like, it's really cool, and it's really impactful on me and my experience of kind of changing from like the negative body image to having a good body image and kind of choosing self-love, I guess, instead.
I'm guessing that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Would I be right?
Yeah.
And so any additional advice, and I ask any of the panelists this, any additional advice that you would give to, high school students your age, college students, young women that maybe are struggling with this? Listening.
One thing that I like to remember is, and one thing that I would tell classes is that when I'm 75 years old, 85 years old, I'm going to think about all the fun times that I had in my life, and I'm not going to look back and be like, well, at least I was skinny. Like, I didn't have fun because I was self-conscious, but I had a good life. And I think that a lot of people don't realize how free you can be when you have a positive self-image, because it is one of the most freeing things, and you feel like you can do anything when you're not bogged down with self-hatred. And so I think that just remembering that body image, like the way you look, it shouldn't be like the main focus, because you can do so much more when you're not focused on how you look.
I think another big thing is kind of finding a passion that you truly care about, so that you can kind of take your mind off of whatever insecurities you're feeling and you're focusing on. And I think, my biggest breakthrough that I had was one summer when I went to camp, and the camp was mainly with like hiking and backpacking and being in the mountains. And that's when I kind of, the first, I guess, epiphany that I had, that my body meant something to me and that it served more of a purpose than just its appearance, because it could take me up these mountains and show me these amazing sights that meant more to me than the way that I looked. And finding a different way to look at my body and a different reasonings of kind of how I lived and how I defined my life and my values and everything. It changed once I kind of stopped focusing on the way that I looked and how I felt about my insecurities, or how I felt about the way that I looked, and focusing more on how I was living my life and how different things were important to me. And once I did that, I always say in presentations that my freshman year, I wasn't really living. I wasn't going to the basketball games. I wasn't going to football games. And now by senior year, I went to every single football game except for one. And, it's just, my life has completely changed. Like Galen said, that your life just kind of opens up and you feel like you can do anything, because you have this confidence and this just idea that it's not important about what you look like, because in the end, you're going to remember all the great times you had and not what you were wearing on that specific day or what you looked like or anything like that.
And it sounds like part of what you're talking about is self-esteem, right? The way we view ourselves, and that there's more to us than just our physical appearance. I'm curious to ask also for the young women that are here, we talk a lot about eating issues. We usually put some of the blame on culture and media. I'm wondering what your opinions are on that. Do you think that's a significant factor? Do you think that really affects girls and young women? And I should say too, this is an issue that affects boys and men as well. The percentages of reported eating issues are somewhat lower, but I don't want to minimize that either. But any thoughts on that in terms of culture and media?
Well, obviously it really affects young women, because I think especially if you don't have a strong role model in your life, you're always going to be looking elsewhere for role models. And if that's in the media, the people that are in the spotlight are not realistic. You see someone and their body type in the media, and you're just not going to be able to fit in that. And you get an image in your mind that that's how you have to be, and that's how you have to be beautiful, and that beauty is not a variety. It's only a very specific type because that's all that's shown. You don't see a variety of beauty in the media.
And it seems like a lot of the quote-unquote models out there are themselves developing eating issues because of the sort of standard that they're placed under, right? That they have to look perfect, etc. So I think it's a real challenge, and I'm really glad that we're here talking about it tonight. I want to let the audience know that we would like your participation. Our audience here, please calm down, everyone. Our audience here, as well as our audience at home. If you're watching at home, we really would like your participation. You can participate live with our show this evening by going to boulderpsychologicalservices.com and clicking on Submit a Question right in the upper left-hand corner of the homepage. And we will get your question here, and we will ask our panel. So please participate, those of you watching at home. I also want to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Olsen. Dr. Elizabeth Olsen is here with us tonight. She is a licensed psychotherapist, and she comes to us with expertise around eating issues. So I just want to welcome Elizabeth. And in terms of what you've been hearing tonight, Elizabeth, anything you want to add in terms of some of the issues that bring people to this? And the other thing I would be curious to hear about is I often, when I'm talking to eating disorder specialists, they often make the distinction between eating disorders and disordered eating. In other words, the issue is much broader, at least this is my understanding, than just anorexia, bulimia, etc. There's a much wider spectrum of issues that challenge a whole lot of people out there. So maybe you could speak to that, Elizabeth.
Sure, I can try to, and maybe Carmen can help me with it too. But the other thing I was thinking about, in addition to what you guys are talking about, a lot of what I see when I work with people who have issues with body image or eating disorders is messages that they get from their family as well. And it's kind of amazing how when people come into my office and they may be presenting with an eating disorder, either bulimia or anorexia, they often come in without an awareness of how the messages that they've heard from their parents, either their parents' views about their own body or comments that their parents might make about their bodies, or their parents' relationship with food and diet or exercise themselves, how that gets translated to them. And there's often a lot of just unconsciousness around it. And through therapy, what I often see begin to happen is that people start to identify what are the messages, what are the things that they've heard, what are the things that they've seen, and it's almost like a light goes on and they say, oh my gosh, this isn't normal, this isn't how this is actually supposed to go, this isn't the way that I should think about my body or the way that I should feel about my body or how I should eat or how I should exercise, that it's like an awakening that occurs, just greater awareness about how these family messages can actually be transmitted. And I don't know if I've ever worked with someone who has an eating disorder who hasn't gotten messages from their family. So that's one piece that I would bring in. The other thing, there is, I think, a real spectrum in terms of eating issues, and I think eating disorder is on one end of that. I think body dysmorphic disorder, which can be a real focus or obsession on a part of the body, that a person has the idea that if I can just change this part of what I look like, then my life is going to change and I'm going to be able to, live so much more free. And it's often really connected with anxiety. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you can have dieting and maybe body image issues and concerns, but it doesn't necessarily get to the point of being disordered eating or subclinical eating disorder or eating disorder. So there's a real spectrum that people can go along. I don't know, is there something more you might say to that, Carmen?
No, I think that covers it.
Yeah.
And I would be curious, and I'd be curious to ask the rest of the panel as well. We have parents often watch our show, and I think there's a lot of parents out there that maybe are sending messages to their kids that not really aware that they might be problematic. Maybe you can give us some, and I'd be curious to hear from everyone else as well, some examples of just, in the average family, some things that parents may want to keep in mind just to really help to break that cycle.
The kinds of things that I see a lot, and it's not just localized to Boulder because I've worked with people who are students here but whose parents lived in other places. A lot of what I see, and I don't know if you guys have different views on this, but is parents that are really concerned either about dieting or being really fat conscious perhaps in the house in terms of what they eat and what they don't eat. A lot of times they just make a lot of comments about feeling fat or looking like they think they're fat, and They just make a lot of comments like that I think the kids really internalize as, well, what does that mean about me? And how should I be thinking about my body? And how should I be eating? And it can really be problematic. And when I work with families, I really try to encourage the girls and the boys that I'm working with to speak up to their parents. And oftentimes you can really start to see healing occur when people start to address those issues with their family members. That's oftentimes a pivotal place in the treatment I've seen either, and sometimes the families are open to it. Oftentimes it's hard for the parents to hear things, but it's a real critical place where people can begin to make changes when they start to separate themselves from the messages that they've been hearing. So.
And I can relate with that. My family, if anything's wrong, it goes to my body. Maybe if you lose some weight, everything will be fine. And sometimes people aren't okay with you accepting yourself and being like, I'm okay with what I have. It always has to be, oh, your weight, or maybe if you change this. And it's not necessary like that. After being in BYBA, you learn how to love yourself and how to be okay with yourself day by day without noticing those little things that aren't really important, when it's more important to just be happy with yourself. And the messages media sends, they're necessary, not true, and you need to avoid them. And everybody's beautiful in their own way, and you'll learn that sooner than later, hopefully.
Thank you. Daniela.
I was just gonna say that as a parent, I think it's a big job that if you have your own struggles with your body image, you need to do your part to take care of them, because no matter how much you try to avoid making comments to your child, your behaviors speak a lot more than your words. And if children grow up around, toxic behaviors surrounding body image, they're just going to adopt those. That's just how it works. I think parents really need to try to do their part to heal themselves before they can raise a child in a positive body environment.
And I remember last year we did a presentation at Platt Middle School with Galen's mom, Elizabeth Tierney, and it was a seminar with both parents and their kids. And it was by far one of my favorite experiences and memories from Boulder Youth Body Alliance, because when I remember we did this presentation, we gave them a similar presentation just to what we normally go through, and just kind of talking about where we get the messages that we're told of how we're supposed to look and what comes with being thin and all these messages. And then on top of it, how just what parents say and what parents do, how it impacts us. And I guess just kind of showing the parents that their actions that they do, and even if they just go on diets a lot or anything like that, that sends a message to their kids. And then at one point we kind of split up, and the parents worked with Galen's mom, and we some of the boys went with like a coach, and some of the girls went with me and another peer educator, and we all just kind of talked about in our own separate groups just what it was that impacted us and how it was that our families kind of related to our struggles or related to how we thought about ourselves. And when we came back together and kind of tied it all up, just to kind of hear the differences in what parents understood as to how their actions impacted their children. And I remember after the presentation was over, a mom came up and she was thanking us for coming in and speaking with them. And she said that she had just recently given her daughter a smartphone. And part of the conditions of her having the smartphone was that she had to have an app that was like a calorie counter or something like that. And she and her daughter had just gotten the phone like the day before, and she meant it in a way of just kind of, she wanted her daughter to be healthy. She meant it in good terms, and she wanted her to just all around be healthy. And she didn't understand that, in asking her daughter to count the calories and watch what food she was intaking, that it probably was going to harm more than it was actually going to help. And just, I think for the biggest thing for parents is just kind of get an understanding of that just based on the way that you look or based on your weight doesn't exactly determine your health. You can't look at a person and say they're healthy because they're thin. And once you kind of, I know that was a really big thing for me, is once I kind of separated the idea of health and weight, I kind of began to realize a lot more things. And I think when parents kind of take a step back and see that there's so many other aspects in health than just the way that your child looks, then it becomes easier for you to kind of open up on the levels of body image and the media and what messages are being sent, and kind of understanding just in a whole what comes with being healthy.
And one message that one strategy that we promote in BYBA is health at every size, and also intuitive eating and intuitive exercise. And I think it's a really hard concept for a lot of people to understand, because they've been told for their entire lives by the media and by their parents and just in traditional households that you have a certain number of calories per day if you work out a certain number of hours or minutes, that you're going to be healthy. And in BYBA, we promote intuitive eating, which is eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full and listening to what your body really wants. And it's a really difficult concept for some people, because I think a lot of people are trying to be kind to their children and have them be healthy and be the best that they can, but it's not always effective, because the way that they go about it is saying that some foods are good and that some foods are bad, when in reality everything is okay in moderation. And by creating bad foods, there's going to be guilt associated with that and shame, which can lead to a lot more problems.
I know that when folks have serious eating disorders, oftentimes it requires a treatment team, not just a psychotherapist, but other folks as well. One of the people that's usually involved is a nutritionist. And I'm wondering if that's because we really need to be educated about nutrition and eating balanced diets, etc. Do you find that as something that's important, that's lacking maybe in terms of how we educate our kids, and something that people need to understand?
Yeah, I think I worked with a nutritionist for a while, and I knew nothing about what she was talking about, because I had just not been educated in nutrition at all. And the foods that she told me to eat had always been labeled as bad foods, when in reality everything has nutritional values. Some just has more than others. And so, yeah, I think a lot more education needs to happen with nutrition.
Can you give us some examples of that? Like what foods that you were surprised were not as unhealthy maybe as you thought?
Well, I remember one day she told me for a snack to eat peanut butter and jelly, and I was like, what? That has so much sugar in it. But in reality, it has protein and carbohydrates and the right amount of sugar. It's actually a great snack for you. Mm-hmm. And I was just absolutely shocked.
And I think Americans, and I'm curious to ask a little later about other cultures too. I have a feeling this happens cross-culturally. I don't know. I'm wondering if anyone has information on that. But, the idea of eating when you're hungry, I think, is something that in our culture we don't really think about at all. And we have a lot of cues to eat all the time, commercials, etc. And I think that's just a simple yet such an important idea, that to eat when we're hungry, and not just to eat for the sake of eating. The other thing that I'm curious about is family meals. As psychotherapists, we often talk about how, boy, it's so important to have quality time with your family, etc. And it seems like mealtime is one of the few times that actually families get together. And even then, in the sort of two-parent working household, sometimes that doesn't even happen. And so I just wonder about your opinion on that. Do you think it's important for families to eat together more? And are there some issues that come up that are problematic when families eat together? I know that when my daughter was young, I would order off the child's menu, which was great. And then at one point she said, she was like 10, and she was like, I want to order off the adult menu. And I was sad, because the children's menu is much cheaper than the adult menu. And she was still age-wise in that window, but I felt like, well, I guess that's okay. And so I made a rule. It was probably a terrible rule. But I made a rule because what would happen is she'd say, yeah, I want to try the adult food. I'd say, okay. And so she'd order something. She'd have a bite. And she'd say, I don't like that. And, it was like $14.95 or whatever. And so what I said to her, and she remembers it to this day, thank God she didn't develop an eating disorder. What I said to her is, you have to eat at least half of your food. Otherwise, you have to pay for it. Now, we never had the problem again, but thank God she didn't develop an eating disorder. I'm thinking that was probably horrible messaging to give to my own daughter. But In terms of your own family life, and you don't have to get too specific in terms of your own family watching and being upset about what you say, but I'm interested in your opinions about that. What happens in terms of family dynamics? We talked about messaging that happens in families, but I think, at the dinner table, I know a lot of people are told to finish what's on their plate. I know I was raised that way, and I tend to get in that habit. If I go out to eat, that's sort of an unconscious goal that I have to finish what's on my plate. So I'm just curious from anyone on the panel, any thoughts about that in terms of family interaction as relates to food?
I think family dinners are really important. I know I grew up with them. It was like a rule. Like every night we ate dinner together, and I remember I didn't even realize that all families didn't have dinner together until like middle school. When I left, I went to a really small elementary school, and so once I got to a bigger school, it was kind of like I was really shocked to find out that families didn't eat dinner tonight and eat dinner together every night, because that's just what I grew up with. And my dad always made a home cooked meal. And my friends always, to this day, say that I was so lucky and that I'm still so lucky to have his delicious food, which, Dad, I agree, it's delicious. But, I mean, he always made one thing. And even when I was little, if I didn't like it, I had to find something to eat, because he wouldn't make another meal and I couldn't get up and make something else. And I think that was a good thing to grow up with, because he wasn't telling me how much to eat or that I needed to eat these specific foods. He was simply making a meal that he felt had the adequate nutrition and whatever I needed for that meal, and that's what was given to me, and that I had to find something to eat in there. And I think that was a really good way of kind of showing me that there's a variety of foods out there that can be delicious, even if they are vegetables, because as a kid, it's like you kind of are like vegetables are gross, they come out of the ground. But like my dad kind of showed me that that they are delicious and that there are many different ways that you can make them, and showed me that foods in general, foods are fun, and that there are many different ways to make combinations. And I know this is something Carmen's her Facebook posts are always about what she's making for dinner, and it's kind of really fun. And one of the charts that she shows us is just this, it's just a chart with 4 different corners in it. And one corner is the food that you really like, that has a nutritional content that is, not like empty calories, or it's really good food and it's good for you. And then there's the category of the foods that maybe aren't the best for you, but still just taste really good and that you just absolutely love. And then there's the foods that are maybe good for you, but that you just really don't like. And then the foods that just maybe just really have no nutritional content and just aren't really you don't like the way that they taste, and it's just not really worth eating. And she talks about finding ways to take the foods that you don't like but that might be really good for you and making them into something that you would like, and kind of finding that balance. And I think family dinners are a really good way of kind of exploring food in a different way and finding ways to make meals delicious and kind of take away from the content of the ideas of calories and how much you're eating or how much you need to eat and all this, and just kind of focusing on the fun that food has and the idea that it's nutrition that you need and it's energy that you need, but making it tasty.
They actually came out with a study this year that said that family dinner time is a protective factor for kids. It's an actual risk reducer around problematic behaviors like drug use, alcohol use, any of the kind of behaviors that can make trouble for kids. So it's very protective. And one of the things that they actually said about it was that it's really important to have a meaningful discussion at the dinner table if you can as a family. One of the things I would recommend to try to avoid, if at all possible, is power struggles, I think, around food at the dinner table, because that does kind of take the fun out of it. And I think forcing kids to finish the food that's in front of them is kind of antithetical to this intuitive eating idea. And what I do with my son Levi, he really wanted me to mention his name tonight, and to tell a story, is that I just ask him to eat a little bit of everything and to try it. And if he doesn't want to eat it, he doesn't have to, but I want him to give it a try. And we try to make it fun, and we play games. He's 5, but try to enjoy it. And I try to cook a meal every night for him with well-balanced kinds of things in it. But I agree with you. I think making it a fun, connective experience is really important, and helps to boost that positive relationship to food and health.
And also, just on another note of what you were saying about having to finish your meal, at the dinner table. With my family, it has always been that even if you aren't hungry, that you sit down at the table and you participate. And my dad, he's the cook of the family, and he'll always make enough that you'll be able to eat it, say, in an hour when you're hungry. And so at my house, you still have to sit down for dinner, but if you're not hungry, you don't have to eat. Because there's going to be food later when you actually are hungry. Because I don't think, in my opinion, I don't like to eat when I'm not hungry. I don't think that food gives me that satisfaction. I don't think it tastes as good when I'm not hungry. And I think that it makes eating a task and a chore to eat when you're not hungry and to be forced to eat. And I don't think that food should be looked at like that, because it's a wonderful thing that gives your body nutrition.
Why do you suppose that people eat when they're not hungry? It seems sort of intuitive and obvious. You should eat only when you're hungry, but a lot of us break that rule. Why do you suppose that's the case?
I think that for a lot of people, they might think that they're hungry because it's a lot easier said than done to intuitively eat and listen to what your body's saying. And a lot of people aren't in tune with what their bodies want. And so I think that a part of that is a shallow listening of what your body wants. And it's also a comfort thing for a lot of people to eat just because they think that it's comforting.
So in other words, for some people, they might eat as a way to cope, right? To reduce anxiety or depression, etc.
Boredom.
Emptiness, loneliness. Loneliness is a big one that can trigger it.
And so I'm assuming, and Elizabeth, you can speak to this as well as Carmen, that when folks are at a point where they need treatment for eating issues, that like substance abuse treatment, you're not necessarily just treating the eating issue, you're treating some of that might be a symptom of an underlying problem, and that you're also treating the underlying self-image, social, etc. kinds of issues. Would that be correct?
Yeah, a lot of what I find and what I try to focus on in the work that I do is around helping women and men who are acting in ways that are causing problems for them to try to put their actions into words. So what is it that you're communicating when you're throwing up? You know, is it an angry act? Is it somebody trying to say something to someone and that's one way that they're communicating that? What are the things that might be going on inside of them that they find objectionable? So a lot of times what I see for folks who have eating disorders is that they kind of do sort of a compartmentalizing with themselves. So they say that this is the all good part of themselves and this is the all bad part of themselves. And there's oftentimes in families where there's eating disorders a lot of pressure to be very good and to be a good girl or a good boy who does well in school, who is high achieving, is highly functional. And there can be a lot of stress involved with that. And so the eating disorder is sometimes a stress reliever, and it's also sometimes a place for them to have kind of this outlet for the part of them that they feel like they have to keep secret or that they have to keep separate from the rest of the world. And so in the treatment, I try to help them find ways to get more in touch with that and to give that part of them a voice in a safe place where they can begin to communicate that. And a big piece of when I think people get better and get well and heal from an eating disorder is I don't focus a lot actually on the food or the eating or changing all of that behavior unless it's really at a critical dangerous point. And I do try to involve a nutritionist because I feel like they can help with that piece of it. But a lot of what I try to do is help them with beginning to say more and talk more and to just be more spontaneous and free with their feelings and more direct and authentic in the way that they're relating with people. And I think it kind of fits with what you guys are talking about, or just being in their bodies, because a lot of times people who have eating disorders or body image issues, it's like they're almost outside of their bodies watching themselves interact with other people, and they're not really in their body. And what I hear you guys talking about is how do you live in your body? What can you do to get yourself back into your body so that you can feel your feelings and be in touch with that and put words to those feelings and express it in your relationships with people. And so a lot of the time, to me, that's the marker of health and change that begins to happen. And then the eating issues often start to resolve in a more natural, kind of authentic way as people are getting more comfortable with themselves and their feelings.
Anyone want to add anything?
I think what you said about not being in your body is very true, because I know when I struggled with an eating disorder, I felt like totally disconnected, like I was just placed inside this container and like I didn't really own my body. I think a big thing that helped me really own my body was like dancing, because you're seeing directly that you're in control of your body and that your body can move for you, because eating disorders just disconnect you totally, because you spend all this time hating your body, and so you start to feel just a total disconnect from it.
And I think a big thing is that, like, the same thing happens when you're struggling with poor body image. You know, it can be just as detrimental and just as much of like a warning factor as a problem as an eating disorder can be, because, you know, for me, I might not have ever fit like strictly like an eating disorder behavior, but it's like I mean, it came with like disordered eating and stuff, but just focusing on being so unhappy about the way that I looked and seeing my friends struggle with eating disorders around me, and I made a conscious note that, like, you know, I wasn't gonna suffer from an eating disorder. And even though maybe you might have looked at me and I didn't fit that strict, like, characterized like anorexia or anything like that, but I was still struggling just as much as someone with an eating disorder. You know, I still had those same emotions, and I still had that out of body feeling of not living and not being there and just not understanding what was going on. And I think it's taken me, you know, like at least 3 years to really truly figure out kind of that the poor body image was just as impacting and detrimental as an eating disorder, and that it's just as much needed for like the awareness and the education around it, because it's often just like overlooked, like, oh, they just have a poor body image, like it's okay. Because, like, I mean, I know in middle school I felt like it was like self-centered and conceited just to think that I was pretty. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I say in middle school presentations, is that it's okay to think that you're pretty, because that doesn't mean that you're self-centered. That just means that you're comfortable with who you are and that, like, you're gonna go out in the world with confidence.
I know that 3 of you are seniors in high school. One, Galen, is a freshman in college. I'm curious what you see among your peers. I mean, do you see this as a really big problem in terms of your own peer groups and your friends, et cetera? And how does it present itself?
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay. I think that without BYBA, college would be a lot more of a struggle for me, because I hear so many times a day people talking about the freshman 15 and just gaining weight, and it's BYBA, like having that in my pocket has helped me so much, because it helps me realize that the freshman 15, it may happen, but I know how to either prevent it or accept it, because my body is going to either gain weight or lose weight according to what it needs and what it wants. And there are so many girls that I know that will work out 2 times a day, only eat salads, or will take diet pills because they're so scared of gaining weight. And so it's really helped me, and I've been able to talk to them and be like, if your body's supposed to gain weight, it will gain weight, because your body is such a magnificent and like smart thing, and it'll tell you if it's craving something and that's what you're needing. And so there are a lot of college students who are struggling with negative body image, and it's not just girls. I know a lot of guys also that are struggling with body image, and it's a huge thing in college. And I think that I know a statistic that CU has twice the national average of eating disorders, and I think that a lot of colleges also have that, because you're away from your parents and you're on your own, and so you have all that freedom, and a lot of people don't know how to deal with that freedom, and it becomes an insecurity.
And I don't know if it's true in terms of that statistic with CU Boulder, but, you know, Boulder, particularly in Colorado in general, we have a very sort of health-oriented culture, and I'm guessing that's a double-edged sword, right, in terms of it's good to be healthy, but it's also a problem to be obsessed about how you look, etc.
Yeah, because I think that also a lot of people associate being thin with being healthy, when that may be true for some people, but that's not true for everyone. And so that goes along with health at every size. And I think that in Boulder, that misconception of being thin is being healthy creates a lot of unhealthiness.
What about the others that are in high school? What do you see in terms of peers?
I think exercise is a big thing, because in Boulder, you really don't think it's abnormal for someone to work out like 2 times a day. But I know a lot of my peers exercise just too much. It's not, they say like, I have to go to the gym. Oh my God, I have to go run. When really you should never feel like you have to go exercise, because it should be, like Galen touched on, intuitive movement. You should be going to exercise because your body needs to move. It wants to move. You can, do other fun exercise if you don't like to run on the treadmill. But I think in Boulder, it's kind of like cloaked that exercise is not, that it's only viewed in a positive way, but it can definitely outdo it really easily.
And also adding to that, not only our weight, like acne, a lot of teens use a lot of products, or you're not happy with your hair, they dye their hair constantly, like they're just trying to fit in to a stereotype where you're not really like that. So you see that a lot in high school too.
Another thing that I've seen just in some of my clients is an obsession with tanning, and the dangers of tanning are just so significant in terms of skin cancer, and there's just almost an addiction sometimes to going and using the tanning beds. They do not feel comfortable seeing their skin be pale, and it's kind of an obsession right now, in addition, and a dangerous one.
Those of you watching at home, you still have a few minutes to submit your questions for our panel by going to boulderpsychologicalservices.com, clicking on the Submit Questions icon. We'd love to hear from you. You mentioned addiction. I wanted to ask the panel about that. And I certainly am not an eating disorder expert, but my sense from talking to people that have more expertise is there is an addictive quality to eating disorders, which is part of the reason why it's so difficult to treat. The other issue that I think is true, but I'm really curious to hear from the panel of experts that we have here tonight, that eating disorders often develop at a fairly young age, but because there's so much secrecy, as Dr. Olsen mentioned, and I think shame too associated with eating disorders, that a lot of young boys and girls, it goes unnoticed or unrealized because they're so secretive about it, and then they develop this sort of addictive cycle, and then it's so much more difficult to treat. Thoughts about that? And I guess specifically, think about what we can tell the community, tell parents and other students in terms of trying to change that here.
I know that there have been a couple stories in the news lately about really young kids who have developed eating disorders at a young age. And I know that a couple months ago there were 2 girls who were, I think, in 8th grade that killed themselves, and one killed herself because she was being bullied for the color of her hair. And so I think that a message to parents is to listen to if your kid is getting bullied and take that seriously, because bullying is a huge part of negative body image and eating disorders, because it's really impactful what your peers say, because even just with fat jokes or thin jokes, it's creating a good and a bad, saying that being fat is bad and being skinny is good, or even when there are thin jokes that a certain way to look is bad and one way is good. And so it's becoming a younger and younger age, and I think that parents really need to pay attention to if their kid is getting bullied and be able to help them with that.
And I think specifically with middle school age, I mean, I know with my own personal story and just with like talking to people in BYBA and just classes, middle school is kind of really the age where the body image and the ideas of the ideal body and everything really kind of bombard you. And to have an open communication with your kids about body image and what is good body image and what is bad body image and what eating disorders are and kind of how to handle all the messages that you're being told is really important, because I know I don't really talk with my parents about even just like what I do in BYBA. It's like they know what I do and and like they tell people about it, but we've never really had a conversation about kind of what it is that we do, because it's always kind of just been like the topic that you avoid almost, it's like it's taught in health classes, and at least in my household it was like we never really talked about eating disorders. We never really talked about good and bad body image, and I think it would have helped a lot, not only to hear just from like my health teacher, but hear from my parents about eating disorders and about body image and just about all the messages that I've been told. Because, I mean, you know, for me, my mom would not let me have Barbie dolls when I was growing up because she felt that they were too unrealistic and she just wouldn't let me have them. And I never really knew that she wouldn't let me have Barbie dolls and why she wouldn't let me have Barbie dolls until I joined BYBA. You know, it was great that she didn't subject me to that message at such a young age, but it would have been nice in middle school to hear, you know, I did this for this reason, because you're being told these messages and you don't have to listen to them.
And you know, what's interesting to me, we talk about this issue when we talk about substance abuse, and we know for a fact that the more families just have open, two-way communications about substance abuse, the less likely their children are to engage in that behavior. And I'm kind of hearing the same thing from you, that if parents maybe just talked more about the subject, they don't have to be the expert, but they can just ask their kids, what do you think about it? I saw a panel on TV and they were talking about this issue. What's your opinion? What do you see? Are you suggesting that could be really helpful?
Definitely. I mean, just having that open communication, and I mean, just as much as you talk about going into high school and the drugs and the drinking that you're going to be subjected to, I mean, just as much as like the drugs and the drinking, you're going to be subjected to, I mean, body image and the media and just all these messages of this ideal body. And to talk about that and to kind of just open the book on that and not just kind of like put a cloak over it, like Dayton said, I think it would impact peers in our community in a huge way.
I know that when I did a presentation at the Parent Engagement Network, we were advising parents to talk to their kids about drinking and when to be open with their kids and be like, if you do end up drinking and you need a ride home so you don't drive home with a drunk driver, please don't hesitate to call me. And I think, and my parents have been completely supportive and open and are willing to talk about anything with me, and that includes eating disorders and body image. And I think that's what's really helped me stay grounded, and that's actually how I got joined in BYBA, because of my parents. And I think that open communication just helps so much more, and it makes it so eating disorders and body image, it's not just the elephant in the room, but we can talk about it and we can just know that it happens, but also know ways to prevent it and have someone to talk to about these issues.
And I think as much as possible, if parents can even consider being open or willing to explore and hear feedback from their kids about, are there ways that I might be contributing to anything for you, the more open and willing they can be to hearing things, even if it's hard and they don't maybe think that they're doing it, to be as non-defensive as possible in how they respond. So that, because if parents respond defensively, kids are going to shut down. And it's going to be more of that two-way conversation if parents give an open attitude towards it.
And they know, right? The kids know the messages they're getting, and they can. I'm laughing because just earlier tonight we were at dinner, and like they know all of my quirks already. You know, they know all of my concerns, and they read me. And so I think they're also able to really read their parents, and they know what's happening, and whether it's stated or not, the messages that they're getting, they pick that stuff up. And I know you're about to ask another question, but I also want to go back 1 second, because we were talking about eating disorders happening at a younger and younger age, and that's true, but there's also a surge in eating disorders happening in midlife women, and and men too, I suppose, but I have heard a lot, women specifically, happening in midlife, and so I don't want anyone that might be listening to feel invisible by us focusing on the young kids.
Mm-hmm. And if someone that's watching has a concern about themselves or their child, what would our advice be?
I think seeking out a professional or someone who really knows, because I mean, eating disorders are so complex. And I know for me personally, being in BYBA, anytime I have anyone confront me saying, you know, this person has this behavior and what do you think about it? What would you do? I still always consult Carmen, because I don't fully understand them, and I don't want to say something that's going to be more hurtful than helpful. And so I think it's really important to understand that you need to voice your concern, and you need to let them know that you notice and that you're concerned, and that there's obviously something there's something that's concerning you, but kind of really outsource to someone who has a larger understanding of eating disorders and every aspect of them, and really try and gain as much resources as possible instead of just trying to, just fix it yourself.
I think also have the courage to, be able to say, I'm not okay and that I need help, because I think that is the hardest thing. It's easy to go along and pretend like you're okay. And, oh, yeah, maybe I have some issues with food, but they're totally fine. Once it starts, you feel like it's, taking a hold of your life in a negative way. It's really important to have the courage to step up and ask for help, which is one of the hardest things to do.
And Carmen, we're so lucky in our community to have BYBA. Obviously, you're doing such a great job. What incredible young women you have with you today. Please let the community know how they can get in touch with BYBA. Maybe they would like a presentation at their school or their community group. Help us out with some contact information.
That's great. So if you want to get in contact with BYBA, you could email info@boulderyouthbodyalliance.org. I know it's a really long email, but byba.org was taken, so we have to spell it all the way out. So you can feel free to email, and I will respond, and we can schedule presentations, get you connected to resources in the community. If parents have kids that they think would be interested in becoming peer leaders, really happy to talk about that. And also want to take the opportunity to really thank the organizations in the community that have provided the funding for making this organization happen. And we get a lot of funding from the City of Boulder Youth Opportunities Program, the Youth Opportunities Advisory Board, the Community Foundation Serving Boulder County, the Brett Family Foundation, Jared Polis Foundation, and Wells Fargo. Really, we couldn't do what we do without them and the support of the community.
And where could people send if they wanted to donate to your nonprofit, to BYBA?
Oh, that's a great question. There's actually a donate button right on our website, boulderyouthbodyalliance.org.
And we also have a Facebook group that you can like, and we have a lot of cool links and updates there. And we also have a texting service that I think is pretty cool. And once a week we send out body positive messages. And so if you text BYBA to 313131, you'll get some pretty cute messages.
They make your week. They're awesome.
I've got a couple of quick questions for us because we're wrapping up on our time from our audience. One question relates to role models, and the member from our audience talks about Lance Armstrong, who's become sort of a role model superhero around cancer survival. And this audience member thinks, wouldn't it be great if there were celebrity survivors of eating disorders maybe that would step up and talk about this? Because again, it seems like such a shame-based disorder. Do you think that would be helpful?
There is, Demi Lovato actually recently came out and said that she has been struggling with an eating disorder, and I think she's one of the first people to really, at least a teenager, to really come out and talk about her struggle. And I think that, and she has a tattoo, and I'm actually completely blanking on it. I think
it's Stay Strong on her wrists.
And then also she just has a campaign that love is louder than words or something. But I think that she's become a huge role model for people. And before that, I don't think teens had many people to look up to about eating disorders.
Well, the people they looked up to were the people that were super thin, right? That was part of the challenge.
And now there's this teenager who's becoming this beautiful young woman who has been able to now accept her body and be who she's supposed to be, because she's taking care of her body.
Mm-hmm. Another question from our audience, wondering about does the school district teach basic awareness around eating disorders in terms of the health curriculum, PE class, et cetera, something that maybe would be in the Thrive newsletter? Anyone know? I know we're not BVSD employees, but anyone have any thoughts about that?
You guys have taken health classes. What do you think?
I know in middle school I had a great teacher who really, she really focused. I mean, she gave us a ton of information on eating disorders, and she struggled from an eating disorder, and she kind of shared her own story and really worked with what she was meant to teach in the curriculum and trying to teach it in a helpful way versus a harmful way. And there definitely, I mean, even today I was doing a presentation in a middle school class, and just we came in and did this presentation, and the questions that we were asking that normally, we'd want the generic responses of, like body fat is bad and all that. These kids had this awareness and had the knowledge to know that, body fat is an insulator and that metabolisms work at different paces and all this information that was just, I mean, I was amazed and shocked to know that they were being taught all of this great information. And I think it's definitely that the education is out there and that there is some messages going towards eating disorders, but I definitely think there's always room for improvement. And I think just an understanding on a larger part of even the nation with the FREED Act and just even our community on understanding that as much as you might want to help, some of the things that you say could be harmful versus helpful. And I think that the district does a really good job of teaching it and putting out that idea that it needs to be taught, but I think there's always room for improvement.
And I think we as parents need to do more too. We can't really look to the school district to do everything. It's great that they do some things, but I think we have to take some responsibility as well. I want to thank our fantastic panel tonight. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for
This
inviting
has been
me.
such an educational experience for me, and I hope for our audience as well. Keep in mind that our next TV program will be on January 9th, and the topic is Teen Depression, the Good News. We're going to meet with a variety of folks from the Hope Coalition, Coley's Closet, Boulder Second Wind Fund. These are all groups that are doing a lot in our community to help to reduce the issue of teen depression in our community. And we also are offering some workshops at the Meadows Library in January. On January 23rd, Dr. Elizabeth Olsen is going to be presenting a workshop on the teenage brain, learning effective communication strategies, gaining a better understanding of your teenager's developing mind. And on January 30th, understanding self-harm in teens. Learn about this growing epidemic and how to stop this cycle of self-abuse with Susan Dennison and Jeffrey Kuhn. I want to thank our sponsors again, and BVSD and Channel 22, our partners, for making this possible. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.
And now the planet's done its bowing down, and soon the growth returns to follow ground. But I know what's churning underneath the snow, and I love my baby, and we've miles to go. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Be with me. We'll beat this, can't you see? So wait a while, winter time. Wait a while, winter time.